This is Resonance 104.4 FM. Flipping marvellous. How you doing? 'Tis I, Nicholas of Hennigan, Nick Hennigan, once more, coming at you with another slice of literary London. Although, we're not actually going to be doing much Londoning today. But we are going to be talking a lot about Britain's second city. Oh, yes. But it's Birmingham, by the way. Yeah, sorry, Manchester. You can have capital of the north if you want, but Britain's second city is Birmingham. And I'm joined by someone who was once described as Mr. Birmingham, which I think would be a great compliment. It's Carl Chinn, or Dr. Carl Chinn, MBE, to give you your full...
Yeah, can, or Professor, whichever you prefer.
Professor, sorry, I wasn't sure where you were. I got lost after...
that one?
Yeah, I missed that one. Yeah, after I failed my 11 plus, I gave up on education, really. So, Carl Chinn, thank you so much for joining us today. And it's kind of, I mean, you might be able to tell if you're listening from overseas. And of course, as I say, we are in Vision. We're in glorious Vision on YouTube and on Bohemian Britain at the moment. You might be able to tell from the accents that we've got one or two things in common, me and Carl. Not least of which is being born and bred in Birmingham, Britain's second city. Did I mention that?
I got. It's a pathetic title. Who cares about being second?
Yeah.
We are Birmingham second to none.
Yeah, exactly. I like that one. Yeah, I remember that one. I say that because I actually do a thing. I write a thing, and we do it every week in London, in around Fitzrovia and Soho, called the London Literary Pub Crawl. Yes. And it becomes almost a standard joke. But if I'm presenting it, it's just almost a standard joke by the end with these Americans and Canadians that Britain, Birmingham, what, Britain's second city. And of course, I tell them it's just 25 miles north of Stratford-upon-Avon, which tends to give them a geographical context.
Do you tell them that Washington Irving, the father of American literature, wrote Rip Van Winkle and Sleepy Hollow in the Jewelry Quarter?
That's true. Good point. No, I don't actually. I mean, I do think about, we did have an American president that bought lots of books at one point and then went to Fitzrovia. Yeah, of course. And I mean, well, let's just talk a bit about Birmingham as a city, because it's we're going to talk about Peaky Blinders, by the way, of course, which everyone I think now has heard of.
And we could talk about London gangs as well if you want, because I've got a lot of knowledge about them.
Well, perfect, absolutely. I mean, I used to hear the stories about how was it the Futurals? There's a family in Birmingham who perhaps I shan't mention now, having dropped.
You're all right, mate. You're safe.
Oh, okay, that's all right then. Yeah, how they sort of got rid of the London gangsters. But let's just talk a little bit first of all about you, because you're born in Birmingham.
Yeah.
Born
in Sorrento.
Yeah, the maternity hospital
in Moseley. Mum was Aston.
Yeah. Oh, that explains your football allegiance as well.
Well, he said, I'm just going to show this up the villa.
Up the villa, yes. I was just saying earlier, I didn't realise it was a Vile. Because being south of Birmingham, you see, south of Corporation Street, you've got to be a blue nose, obviously. But we won't go there. I am actually I did a version of Romeo and Juliet, and it's two houses, the two houses. Yeah. And I did it at the Edinburgh Festival, and I actually I wanted it to be two sort of common families, if you like, not sort of posh families, normal families. And so we actually had the two houses in Romeo and Juliet were Aston Villa and Birmingham City. And it worked. So the rivalry was just pure hatred, as opposed to anything else you might do in Edinburgh, perhaps with, Celtic and Rangers, which is religion. This was just pure hatred. Worked really well.
I bet it did.
Although one of the actors... Yeah.
Mum was Aston, 7 back of 6, Whitehouse Street, Aston, Birmingham 6. She was very proud. And the word I'm going to use now, Nick, it's not an insult. To older Brummies and Black Country, it's a term of affection and respect. Our mum was very proud to be a backstreet wench. Very proud. And Dad was Sparkbrook, Lanepool Road. Mum's family were all factory workers. Dad's family had been factory workers. Then my granddad, Chinn, in 1922, became an illegal bookie. Dad took over as an illegal bookie, took cash betting away from the racecourse, was legalised in 61. I went to a grammar school, Moseley Grammar, but I always worked in the betting shops from when I was 13. I've had a gun at my head twice, been attacked with a machete. So although I grew up much better off than the rest of the family, Mum and Dad were culturally working class and very, very much pushed into me that you don't get bigger than your boots. You remember where we come from.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting, isn't it? Because I guess the whole societal thing is that you've got to better yourself and money and power and all that kind of stuff. And it's only fairly recent in the arts, for instance, that working class, being working class has been recognised as a thing, which is a strange thing for me to say, because being working class myself, born on I wasn't born in Sorrento. I was born at home, Hollybank Road. Yeah, upstairs in the front left bedroom, Hollybank Road in King. Actually, we were King's Heath then.
I see. I'm now in Billsy, just round the corner.
Yeah.
You're just up the road from me.
Yeah, we were Billsley. Yeah, we were changed from B13 to B14 for some strange,
Yeah,
inexplicable reason when I was younger. But I mean, so but it is that working class thing is sort of, and I think it's important to be realised. In that, of course, there are opportunities that will come along, and particularly having worked in theatre a lot of the time, most of the people I've tended to work with have either been Oxbridge graduates or at least university graduates, going back a long way. And one lovely chap, in fact, John Adams, who was for a long time artistic director at Birmingham Rep, he started Payne's Play Avenue writing company. And I remember having a long debate with him about a book that came out called The Oxbridge Conspiracy, and having a long debate with him for about 20 minutes, and he was agreeing with me. And I suddenly realised he went to Balliol. He went, yes, I did. That's right. And Birmingham itself as a city is quite interesting. Tell us a bit about the history, because it's not a very old city, is it, Birmingham?
well, it is, and this is
As a
the
city.
misconception. It is an old city. It's an old settlement. In a city status, it was 1889, granted by Act of Parliament. But Birmingham, people think it suddenly emerged like Pandora out of a box and jumped onto the world stage with Matthew Bolton, James Watt, and the Industrial Revolution. No, it didn't. Birmingham is one of the oldest Anglo-Saxon place names in the West Midlands. It's the ham, the home of the Ingas, the people of Beorma Ingasam. He was an immigrant. His people were Angles. They came over from the borders of North Germany and Denmark on the Jutland Peninsula en masse, and settled in the land of the East Angles, East Anglia. And they moved westwards and took over the land. Beorma was probably a small tribal leader, and he and his people were then brought into the Kingdom of Mercia. And we're looking at about the time, the mid-660s, around then, of the Staffordshire Hoard, which a lot of people will have heard of, this amazing collection of Anglo-Saxon gold that was found in a field in Hammerwich, not far from Birmingham. Birmingham then disappears from history. There's no written records of Birmingham, although there are of Yardley and places next to Birmingham. There's no written records till 1086 in the Domesday Book. And, Nick, we were pretty worthless.
Yeah.
A lot of the land was wooded, ladywood, and a lot of the land was heathland, small heath, etc. Tells us about the heathland, Heath Mill Lane. But in 1166, Birmingham was transformed. The Lord of the Manor took advantage of changing socio-economic conditions. He was a weak lord. His overlord was the Baron of Dudley Castle.
Yeah.
And so he realised that there was a growing population. People were moving away from bartering to paying in cash, and nearby was iron ore from the Black Country, and trees from places like Sutton Coalfield could be cut down to get charcoal to smelt the iron ore. More people, cash economy, and a lot of them are making, a lot of these peasants, and I'm using that in the correct term now, not in a derogatory term, a lot of them are not arable farmers, they are pastoral farmers, so they've got a bit more time, and they're making small metal goods for a rural economy, nails, horseshoes, etc. And Peter jumps in first to get a market, the Bullring markets as we know them, and he places them on the slopes above the valley of the River Ray, where there is a ford connecting routes from Stratford, Warwick, Coventry, coming through Birmingham, up the hill to Coleshill, Dudley, Wolverhampton, etc. And that's how Birmingham began. And it grew quite strongly as a market town, but with manufacturers from the very go. And the first description of Birmingham, we know it's there in the tax records, but the first description is not till 1537, when a man called John Leland, in King Henry VIII's reign, came here, and he's come down Camp Hill, which is the main route from the southeast into Birmingham. And he come through as pretty a street as ever I've entered in all my life. Derry's End High Street leading into Digworth. Imagine that today. It's filled with traffic. And on the right, he said, there's a fine mansion house of timber, the Old Crown. And then he comes into Birmingham, a goodly market town. He mentions the parish church, St. Martin's, where there are many smiths making all manner of cutting tools. That, from the word go, is a bond between manufacturing, the fashioning of metal, not the bashing of metal, the fashioning of metal, and the markets. And Birmingham grew strongly. It was ready for takeoff in the mid-18th century, and that's what the canals did. They accelerated our growth.
Yeah, I mean, I love the fact it's something else I always drop in is that there's more canals than Venice Birmingham's got. Although you couldn't see them for a long time, could you? They were all kind of covered in. They only opened
Well,
the
when
bottom.
we were kids, they were filled with dead dogs and cats and bicycle
Yeah,
frames. But
that's right.
it was a great PR ploy. But
Yeah.
Venice's canals are sea canals, ours aren't.
No, they're
They're
man-made,
very
aren't they?
different.
Yeah, and it's the book that you're working on at the moment. We've got to mention this. It's called Peaky Blinders: The Real Gangs and Gangsters. And I actually heard about the Peaky Blinders. I used to work on a radio station called BR&B, which was in Aston Road North, which is inner city Birmingham, by the HP factory, by the way. If you like your HP sauce, used
I
to be
love
there.
HP sauce.
And there was a pub called the Avenue, which sadly is no longer there now. And Wally, the bloke that ran it, I remember him telling me years and years ago about this bunch of thugs that used to hang out, and they were called the Peaky Blinders. And I know, Carl, obviously you've written a book about them. Tell us about the Peaky Blinders and about the book.
Well, I first wrote about the real Peaky Blinders in my doctoral thesis in 1986.
Yeah. Wow.
And I first wrote about the real gangs of the 1920s in a book that came out at the start of the 1990s called Better Betty with a Decent Fella. So in the series, you've got one gang based in Small Heath of organised gang criminals led by Tommy Shelby and his brothers, glamorously dressed anti-heroes, almost Robin Hood type characters. There were no Peaky Blinders in the 1920s. There were old men who had been Peaky Blinders, although most were dead. There weren't Peaky Blinders in just one district. There were gangs of Peaky Blinders all over old, poor and working class Birmingham. And they were not glamorous anti-heroes who were like Robin Hood. They were vicious, bullying thugs. So
where does the name Peaky Blinders come from? Is it true about the razor blade in the cap?
I happen to have a flat cap here with me.
Yeah, I've got mine over there.
So yeah, I'm going to put my flat cap on. All right. Now I'm going to. Me and you are having a bust up. For people from outside the West Midlands, that means a fight, a row.
Yeah.
And I'm going to slash you now. So if I do that and I've got razor blades to keep my cap off, what am I going to do to my fingers?
Yeah.
I'm going to cut them. If I do that to take the cap off, I've opened my whole body up. And then I take it off and the flat cap's soft. So number one, it's not feasible. Number two, it never happened. I've gone through hundreds of court cases, police records, memoirs. Back in the early 80s, I interviewed old men who were grown up during the reign of the Peaky Blinders. Never happened. Number two, their weapons were their boots, coshes made of metal, and most especially their belts, old-fashioned belts, thick leather belts. They would wrap them around the wrist, grab them, the belt with their hands, and leave about 8 inches, which they would buckle and they would slash and slash. Same with the gangs of Manchester and Salford who were called scuttlers. So it never happened. They didn't need that weapon. They had other weapons. They were poor men. Disposable razor blades safety razor blades by King Gillette weren't patented in America until the early 20th century. They were too expensive in England for poor men who went to the barbers to have a cutthroat razor shave. And very importantly, Nick, the original Peaky Blinders did not wear flat caps. I've got plenty of photos from the West Midlands Police Museum, which shows the original Peaky Blinders fitting in with the memoirs that I found, rare memoirs, and the accounts told me by old men in the 80s, they wore billycocks. A billycock is a type of bowler hat, and it was the working man's headgear till the flat cap came in. So what they would do, a fashion came in. There were gangs in Birmingham from the late 1860s, and from the 1870s they became known as slogging gangs because they slogged, hit with vicious punches or fighting. From 1890, the sloggers had a new fashion. They had a skinhead haircut, but they liked to quiff across the brow. And so they would get the outside of the billycock, the bowler hat, and they would get the brim and form it into a kind of funnel, wet it and hold it over a fire. And they'd pull it over one eye to show off the quiff. I've got photos from the West Midlands Police Museum that prove that and validate the sources from the period. When the flat cap came in, they did exactly the same and they pulled it over one eye. So the Peak was blind in the eye.
Hence the name.
Hence the name, Peaky Blinders.
Yeah.
Now, they were vicious men. There were numerous backstreet gangs in the Digbeth, Derry Tend areas. There was the Bar Street gang of Great Bar Street. There was the Barford Street gang at the back of the Ballroom Market. There was the Park Street gang. There was the Milk Street gang. In Aston, there was the White House Street gang, which is where our mum come from, but it was before her time. There was the Ten Arches gang, which was a borderland gang of neutrals and Aston. In Highgate, there was the Highgate Street gang. In Sparkbrook, there was the Sparkbrook gang. One of the leaders of the Sparkbrook gang was my great-great-uncle, John Derrick. His brother, my great-great-grandfather, was a vicious, bullying, wife-beating, petty thief. These are not men to be admired.
No.
They were put down by stronger policing in the early 20th century, by organic changes where well-meaning clergymen and women are putting on what we now call youth clubs.
Yeah.
What's wrong with our politicians today letting youth clubs be closed down and youth facilities? And young men were moving away from joining gangs into playing football on a Saturday afternoon and a Sunday. So by 1914, they'd gone, and in 1915, the Birmingham Mail wrote, "What's happened to the Peaky Blinders?" Well, some of them are fighting for their country, others are in the munitions factories, and the police are pleased.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm Nick Hennigan. This is Literary London on Resonance 104.4 FM. We're also live in vision on bohemianbritain.com and on YouTube. I'm talking to Professor Carl Chinn.
Just call me out Carl.
I would, Bab. I would. I call you out, Bab, but no one would understand because he's busting anyway. But we haven't had our little Brummie loving yet. But we're talking about the Peaky Blinders and, of course, Britain's second city. All right. Birmingham, capital of the Midlands. And we're also talking about you as a writer. So the book is called The Real Gangs and Gangsters, Peaky Blinders. Real Gangs and Gangsters.
It's the fourth one in the series I've written, Nick. The first one was very much about the origins of the Peaky Blinders, the fashion, and the emergence of organised crime in England in the 20s. The second book looked at that in details because what happened was a former Peaky Blinder called Billy Kimber, who in the series is portrayed as a Cockney, but actually was a Brummie from Summer Lane, brought together a gang of ruffians known as the Brummie Boys of Birmingham gang. Now, they were men who, in the flat racing season in the spring and summer, left Birmingham to go racing. Why did they go racing? People are carrying money. They went in little groups of 6, 7, and 8. They pickpocketed. They had no virtual police opposition. No stewards would stop them. And they were blackmailing the bookmakers for protection money. Billy Kimber brought them together into an organised force. And by the First World War was dominating the racecourse rackets in the Midlands and the North. In 1920 and 21, he took over down south, allied to the Camden Town mob of George Sage in North London and the Elephant Boys of South London. They were racist. They beat up badly the real Alfie Solomon. How do I know that? His brother told me in a pub in North London in 1987, Simeon Solomon, and I've found evidence of this elsewhere. Solomon turns to the Jewish godfather of the East End, who wants to take over the rackets. He brings in an up-and-coming gangster, Darby Savini. In the series, he's portrayed as an Italian-style Don. He was born in Clerkenwell, in Saffron Hill area, Little Italy. His mum was an English woman. He never spoke Italian. His dad came from northern Italy when he was a baby. It was an Anglo-Italian gang. And this Anglo-Italian gang with English roughs and East End Jewish toughs eventually took on the Birmingham gang. It was England's first gang war between organised gangs from two different cities. 1921, the Racecourse War.
Wow. Why is it, do you think, I mean, we've got a lot of London gangs as well, but what is the fascination? I mean, Stephen Knight wrote the Peaky Blinders series, and he's a Brummie as well. What is the fascination, you think? Because as you've said, and as we all know, these aren't really nice people. They're thugs. They're stupid in a sense. What's the attraction, do you think?
I think the attraction in terms of the film portrayal, the filmings, I think the attraction in a film portrayal of gangs is very much based on the mafia. You know,
Right.
you
Yeah.
look going right back to the 20s and the 30s, the George Rafts actors, and onwards from them to Mario Puzo's novels and The Godfather. It's this belief that they were kind to children, respectful to women, looked after the elderly. They abuse their own. That's the problem with these gangs. And the real backstreet gangs were nothing like an organised criminal gang. They were more about who's the hardest. A lot of them were petty criminals, like my great grandfather Edward Derrick, but a lot were normal working men, supposedly, who went to work every day and wanted to fight on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday
Mm.
and have a good drink. So we've got a mixture of motives. And what we've got to also look at, Nick, is just because you're poor doesn't make you a gangster or a criminal. But unfortunately, it does lead some young men away from legality. Why? Because they're excluded from the political, the social, and the economic nation. And if you're a poor man in a poor street, you haven't got the vote, you've got no power. The only thing that you've got is these. We need to understand this rather than excuse it. I'm not excusing it, but we need to understand this if we're to challenge it today.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, God, we could have a whole program about what's happening in terms of social media and politics
Yeah.
and disenfranchised, or at least, I mean, because social media is so new still, isn't it? So
Yes.
let's just talk a bit about though about your process. So you went to grammar school,
Yeah.
and then what made you become a writer, and what was the attraction for doing what you're doing?
So I was very, our mum would have said to you from the moment he could talk, he was fascinated by history.
Yeah.
And looking back at years ago, I'd have said it was the novels I read by people like novelists, like historical novelists like Rosemary Sutcliffe, Henry Treece, Geoffrey Treece, names that have dropped out of use today. It wasn't, Nick. It was the stories told on a Sunday afternoon at the family gatherings by our mum, our dad, our mum's mum and nan, our granddad Perry, mum's dad, great uncles and aunts, especially Auntie Wynne. They were always, when they'd had a little drink, talking about the old end. So mum's old end was Aston Cross, dad's was the Ladypool Road, the lane, as we used to call it in Sparkbrook. That's really what made it. I went to university, I went to Manchester. I was still working all the time in the betting shops as well. I was so homesick, I came home. They managed to get me in at Birmingham. And eventually, after I got my degree, I wanted to do a master's going into a doctorate. And my tutor was a woman called Dorothy Thompson. She was an outstanding historian. And her husband, Edward Thompson, wrote The Making of the English Working Class in the early 60s, which was the book that really started social history.
Mm.
And I wanted to do, I didn't know really what I wanted to do as a thesis, but she used to encourage me to talk about the family stories. And she was fascinated by them. And she says, this is what you've got to do. So my thesis was on the Ladypool Road area, not just documentary. I interviewed lots of old people because working in the betting shops on the Ladypool Road and Stony Lane, I knew lots of older folk. And from there, when I got my doctorate, I was out of work. We sold the betting shops in '84. I was out of work for a long time and chasing work. You know that feeling, don't you, mate?
Oh yes. Oh yes.
And I was on the dole. I was on the government enterprise allowance scheme as the only self-employed historian in the country,
Yeah.
etc.
In there.
But Dorothy managed to get me a publication, and that was with Manchester University Press. The editor was editing books about women's lives, but they got nobody to write about poor women. And I'd done a lot on poor women because all my mum's family were factory workers and been poor. And I'd got a lot of other people I'd interviewed. And my first book came out then, and it was They Worked All Their Lives, 1987. And it was dedicated to my mum, my nan, and my great grannies. And it was about how women always worked all their lives. Without that, Nick, without that from Dorothy, without her encouragement to believe in myself and believe in the people I belonged to, I would never have been a writer.
Yeah, it's funny how it sometimes can be. I had a teacher at school who did the similar sort of thing.
Yes.
Was rather than read your books, I always remember his first Mike Hewitt. I don't know where Mike Hewitt is now. He's probably not around anymore. But he's the first homework he came. New teacher, new teachers were always ready to get them. I found me 11 plus, so I went to a secondary modern school, Wheelers Lane, Boston.
Wheelers Lane.
Oh,
Yeah.
busted. And it was, I remember the first homework he wrote on the board, right, your homework for tonight. And everyone was going, oh, good. There was a scream and a bang, explanation mark. And I
Yeah.
was going, what?
Wow.
That was your homework. Whoa. And I was off. And in fact, funny enough, if you're watching in vision, you'll see there's a poster behind my head about pals
Yes.
and Linda Sue. And that's about 4 kids growing up on a council estate in Birmingham. And it
Oh,
won a little award from the National Theatre, which I was quite chuffed about.
I bet you was.
And it was, so it is sort of important. God, we could talk forever. Look, so basically, I'd like to talk about your writing process, but we're running out of time. I mean, is it, do you have a regular routine? Because we've got a lot of writers that follow us on Bohemian Britain and also listen to Literary London, obviously. Kath in California will no doubt comment at some point. She sends emails most weeks telling me what.
All right, Kath.
Yeah, she listens on the beach in California, apparently.
Oh, it's all right for some.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. But it was, I mean, do you have a plan in terms of how much you're going to write and when you're going to write? Have you got books in your head all the time?
Question. Yeah, I don't sit down and work it out as such. I suppose because I've been writing but this is my 38th book.
Wow.
So I'm very fortunate in that I've been able to follow a career as a writer. These are the only ones that I've made a little bit of money from, because you don't make a lot of money from local history books, but it's a labour of love, and it's about allowing other people to have a voice. So for the Peaky Blinders books, I've got lots of information going back to oral history interviews in the mid-80s, research I've done then, and also about the gangs of the 20s. So I went back to that, and then I start researching. I start looking at newspapers, and thankfully now the British Library has digitised lots of newspapers. It's an amazing resource. It still takes a lot of work, but nothing like it used to be with the old reels and the microfiches and, sucking boiled sweets so you didn't get seasick. So as I'm writing, I'm researching. As I'm researching, I'm writing. So I know I want to do, say, for example, a chapter on the attacks on the police. Over the years, I've gathered lots of material. I'll bring it all together. Then I'll start again researching, and I'll think about how I'm going to start that chapter, work out where I'm going to go, but a lot of it's all up here.
Yeah, so you're kind of what they call it, is it a panster rather than a plotter or something like that?
Well, probably are.
Yeah, no, I didn't realise. Apparently, I'm a panster as well, Robert.
Okay, well, so we're a pair of pansters together.
Yeah, we are. I think we're underpantsters. Anyway, no, let's go. Let's go somewhere else. So how can we find out more about you, Carl? If anyone wants to find out any more about you, and of course the book, Peaky Blinders, The Real Gangs and Gangsters, where can we find out more about you?
I haven't got a website, but my daughters and my wife, my 3 daughters and my wife, have been nagging me for years to start a podcast. And you will be one of my guests, if you would, soon. It's going to be called Our Lives, Our Stories. We're launching it next week, the 12th of February at Norton's, an Irish bar in Digbeth. We've got a lot of people coming. We've interviewed lots of different people, Joe Lycett, Robin Campbell from UB40, but people who are not as well known as well, because that's important.
Brilliant. So if people look at Our Lives, Our Stories, then you will see and hear Professor Carl Chinn. Thank you, Carl. Thank you so much for your time. I mean, we could go on forever, couldn't we, really? I mean, we've had these conversations before. I need to get back to Brummie and do a few pubs I've been to Digbeth for ages. Anyway, that's another story.
Well, I'll just tell you something before you go. Yeah. The best director of the rep in Birmingham we never had, you.
Oh, bless you. Thank you very much. That's very kind. I didn't have a degree in those days. So.
No, I know.
But thank you.
You'd have been busted, mucker.
Oh, I'd have loved to have got my hands on the rep. That's a fact, isn't it? Yeah. But so thank you so much for your time, Carl. And I'm sure we'll have to do this again next time you've got our next book coming out. So the podcast is Our Lives, Our Story, which is going to be launched soon, wherever you get your podcasts, as they say. The book is called Peaky Blinders, The Real Gangs and Gangsters. And that's what we've got time for. Thank you for your company. I'll see you next time. I'm Nick Hennigan. We're on bohemianbritain.com, but chiefly this is Resonance 104.4 FM.